Let's start with your name and pronouns.
Sure. My name is Matthew Gulbranson, and my pronouns are he, she, they.
Can you share how you identify and how you came to understand that part of yourself?
Yeah. It's a long story about how I came to understand that part of myself. I've always been somebody who likes to kind of hang out in the counterculture ever since I was really young. In high school, I hung out with the freaks and the geeks. And have always just kind of been in that space. And so, over time, where the last 4 or 5 years, I really wanted to focus on bringing all aspects of myself into the world. I had this period in my life where I was married, I had kids, I was doing the family, I was doing the professional thing, I was, advancing my career. And just got to a place where I didn't feel like all of me was there and all of me was present. And then there were parts of me that were either had been put away or that maybe haven't been here yet, fully realized. And I always like the analogy of like a gemstone, like a diamond, and that we all have different facets and parts of ourselves and expressions of ourselves. So I kind of use that analogy as a way to think about what are some of the facets of myself that have, like, I haven't used, that I put away, that are kind of dirty, that need to be kind of polished up and like scrubbed. What are parts of myself that haven't been able to shine yet? And then thinking about like, what does joy look like in that space? Like, what does joy look like for me? And one of those things was drag. Like, drag has always brought me joy. And I hadn't been to a drag show in like forever. And I was like, I need more drag queens in my life and I need to go see more drag shows. And so I had a friend who invited me to a drag bingo. It was an X-rated drag bingo. And the first time I went, I laughed so hard, my face hurt. Like, it literally, like my cheeks hurt. And I was like, what have I been doing my whole life? Like, why isn't this a part of like my regular routine? So I went to that for a while. And then I asked my friend, who was also friends with the drag queen who put the bingo on, if they would paint my face, if they would do that. So they said yes. Here's a hair, worked in hair. So he had his own salon. So I came there on a Sunday. He did the whole thing, was painting me up, and I was asking all these questions of like, what are you doing? How do you do this? That, trying to figure it all out because it was like all a mystery. And before, lashes were on, all of that stuff, but before any wigs or clothes or anything like that, he's like, just go into the bathroom and just look at yourself in the mirror. And so I went into the bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror, and was like, oh, hi, there you are. Like, and it wasn't like that kind of tearful, like, oh my God kind of moment. It was more just like, there you are. Like, this is you. Like, this is a part of who you are in your expression. Yeah. And like that part of myself that I hadn't seen in like 20, 25 years.
So how does drag help you express yourself?
So the interesting thing about kind of keeping myself locked away, like that part of myself locked away for so long, when I started looking back and looking at myself of like different, like how I showed up in high school, like how I was in my 20s, I had long hair down to my waist until my late 30s. I would wear skirts to music festivals in my 20s. I would have Rocky Horror Picture Show parties at my house and dress up as Frankenfurter, so there's like thinking about like, oh, of course, like this is something that I always dressed up as a woman for Halloween for years and years and years. Wore my grandmother's wedding dress and things like that. So it had always been kind of there. It's just something that I just kind of put away. So how that helps me express is just like realizing, back then, 25 years ago, we didn't have the terms that we do now. Like, I had no idea that was even a thing. Like, gender fluidity was even a thing. And even just, it's like you were this or you're that. And especially being somebody who doesn't identify as being gay, it's like that's also kind of another piece of of that puzzle, is because for most of kind of the dominant culture, like if you do drag or you're a male presenting person who expresses feminine traits, then you must be gay, right? So those, like, your sexual identity and gender identity often get conflated as the same thing, and they're not. So that was kind of part of my learning too, was like being able to separate those strands, figure out what those really mean, what that looks and feels like, and lives, how that lives in me. Mm-hmm. So for me, drag helps express that kind of, like, to be honest, like that hyper femininity, right? Because I'm also very masculine. Like, I've thought about doing some fun photo shoots where, you know, I'm splitting wood because I grew up in the country and I lived in a cabin for 10 years, and that was my only source of heat, was going out and getting my chainsaw and chopping down trees and splitting wood and stacking, you know, like that's, you know, those kinds of things. And I love to fly fish. I love to be out on the rivers. So I love both sides of those expressions. And I've often thought about what fun it would be to really marry those two things together. I really haven't done that yet. But that's kind of like, that's like one of the things I think that's coming at some point.
So what has been difficult in that process?
Yeah, I think that is, that was part of the pandemic experience for me, is like being in my living room, having no idea what I'm doing, deciding that, like, oh, I'm gonna like start an Instagram for Crystal to, like, and this was a conversation with my mom. I was like, should I do this? Should I not do this? And she was like, do it, because then people can follow your journey and they can see how you grow and you change over time. I was like, okay. So that was tough. That was hard to start that and like post pictures of myself not looking very, very good at all. So during that time, there were a lot of queens who couldn't do shows anymore, right? So they were on Instagram Live or Facebook or other places, painting their face at home because that's what they're used to doing. And so I would get on there and I would ask questions and kind of sit there with literally with a notepad and, like, you know, take notes to be like, oh, this is what they're doing. Oh, this is what they're using. Like everything from the brush to the makeup to the technique to like how they use the brush, you know, like all of that stuff. And then try it out. Last year in April, it was in March, there was a queen that reached out to me and said, she's, hey, you've been killing it on Instagram. Like, what are you doing this date in April? And I was like, nothing. She's like, do you want to do a show? And I was like, oh my God, like I'm going to go from my living room to like performing, right? Which was just like, I was so excited and so nervous and like all of these things. And so that was my first performance, was in April of 21.
So you also go by Crystal. Crystal's your persona that you use or drag. Tell me a little bit about the parts of you that are Crystal. Yeah, CrystylJewylBox. First, so I'll tell you where my name comes from. Yeah. So before I was born, my parents thought I was going to be a girl. So they were going to name me Crystal. So I was like, okay, well, that's a great place to start. And I was doing, you know, reading some history of drag and all the different kinds of forms of expressions of drag and drag history and all of that. And there was a club in Miami that opened in the 30s called the JewelBox Review. And this was this is in Florida in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, where it was illegal to do all kinds of those things, right? And they had drag queens, they had drag kings, like they had all the things there. And it was just so inspiring to like hear of a place like that in the face of, you know, so much resistance, you know, it was a safe place for that expression and for folks to do those kinds of things. So I thought, what a great way to kind of pay homage to that. And then, you know, so there's that jewel box, and then there's just having a sparkly box. And I like sparkly things. So it's kind of, you know, it's a layered name. I love that.
Yeah.
So if someone was going to go to one of your shows, what should they anticipate seeing from you?
Ooh, it depends on the show. There's certain places where kind of there's certain expectations of what kind of things you'll be performing. Mm-hmm. So I like to vary what I do depending on the audience and depending on kind of what I feel like. So most of the time, I mean, I do love to look pretty. I do love the glam. I do love all, you know, the big dresses. And
looking fabulous. So that's always there. Um, Sometimes it's more, pop. Sometimes it's more kind of subversive. Like if it's around like Halloween, I like to kind of show the dark crystal. Um, so yeah, and so a lot of camp. I like camp and I like glam. So it's very glampy.
That sounds like a really good time.
Yeah, it is. I enjoy it.
So I'd love to know a little bit more about ways that you've been misunderstood. How have people misunderstood you?
I think what's interesting is how people, we all do this. We all have our biases. We all have our judgments. We all base what we think about somebody, what they look like, what they're wearing, how they sound, how they act, right? And just like those are the identities and parts of ourselves that are under the surface. So, and I think that's one of the reasons why that facet of myself was put away for so long, because it's so easy to exist in boy form in all the boyish ways. And that's, I'm in my privilege bubble then, right? Like I'm a white dude walking around doing white dude things. And it's very easy to exist in that space versus, showing up as a very flamboyant woman, all the women in public spaces. So it was interesting. I'll just tell a brief story about Saturday, because Saturday was kind of both of those moments. Tacoma had their Pride. So we were performing at a local big venue and went to this after party, right? And I walk into the space and it's all ages space. And it's like you're a celebrity. Like people are like, oh my God, you look beautiful. Oh my God, and it's like, wow, like it's like all this great attention, right? And then after that, we went to the casino to get some food and hang out for a bit. And just me walking around in that space where it was very much not Pride. It was people doing their thing at 2:00 in the morning. And the looks and the expressions and walking into the bathroom and people saying like, what the fuck? Like it is like two sides of the same spectrum in the same night, right? So depending on how people see you, like there's a lot of times and spaces and places where those parts of myself aren't seen, right? And so part of it is my job to not sit back and be comfortable, but like be able to say, okay, how do I express myself in ways of which I truly am, and not sink back into that place of complacency and privilege and kind of resting in those spaces. So
that's a great answer. So let's take the opposite side of the coin. Who's been a really positive influence and supported you?
Yeah, my family's been great. My mom, my brother, my sister. They've come to so many of my shows and are always supportive, which is just like so fabulous to have them, be a support system for me. Because I know that there's a lot of people that don't have that. And then my drag family, being able to find a drag mom and drag sisters and aunties and those folks that I can just show up and be me and show up in whatever, whether we're going out to have some drinks, looking like this, or if I'm just like fully decked out, either it's like, yeah, it's just, that's who I am and that's what we're doing. And it's super fun.
That's great. What gives you hope?
What gives me hope is honestly, I want to say first and foremost, just this, like this younger generation and how folks are just so much more expressive, how much more is understood in a deep way. Because I feel like so much of those gender norms and expectations in the binary and like how that has existed for so long is so stuck in older folks. I'll just say older folks because I am an older folks and I work with, like folks in my generation. And it's like the way that our minds are built, it's like some people just can't get it. They can't understand it. It's like talking a different language. There's so many more people that are doing work on that with so much love and so much passion and grace and just like, I mean, at the end of the day, it's love, right? And it's about knowing who we are and embracing others and who they are. And so even though we're in a really kind of scary place in this time, I think that is actually in opposition of the deeper understanding of how we've grown.
That's beautiful. So what would you like to see change then?
Oh my gosh, so many things.
Can you pick one?
If I'm going to pick one big one, it's going to be our dominant narrative, our dominant ways of thinking and being that keep us stuck in this finite space. When we know that that's not who we are as people, that we're infinite beings. We are. And so we can't change and create systems and create spaces where we can be our infinite selves if we're stuck in those finite ways of being and thinking and doing. So that's the easy answer. That's the big answer. And I know that there's spaces out there that's happening. That's a part of my passion in life, is creating those spaces, like that place where personal transformation meets systems change. And that's the work that we need to do. So, and that happens everywhere. That happens at the grocery store. That happens, in all of our institutions and all of our systems. That happens in relationships and partnerships with other people, and friendships and families and like all the things.
I think you've covered some really great things, and I really love all that you've shared, but I wanted to see if there was any last like pearls of wisdom you wanted to impart to anybody who's watching.
Is find out who you are. Find out what parts of yourself drag is going to express for you. And I think going back to that answer to the last one, there's so much of about drag that gets put into this kind of more dominant cultural box of like, this is what drag is, like this is what's valid, this is what's not. If you're going to be a drag queen, like this is how you have to do it. When drag has been born out of that that backlash. It's subversive in nature. Like it's something that is a protest. That is like saying like, no, like, dominant culture isn't all that. Like there's so much more out there to being alive and expressing who we are.
Well, CrystylJewylBox, Matthew, thank you so much for sharing who you are.
Yay, thank you for having me. This was fun.